Dumelang. Welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, now that the court has ruled that former President Jacob Zuma can stand as a candidate for the Umkhonto We Sizwe party, where does that leave Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution, which bars individuals sentenced to prison for longer than 12 months without the option of a fine from becoming MPs? Did the IEC overreach by implementing this section of the Constitution? Because Jacob Zuma's lawyers argued that that's the work of Parliament. And what does this order mean for the credibility of the IEC? We're meant to speak to the Electoral Commission tonight, but they've just issued a statement saying they're speaking to their lawyers and will not be commenting for now. But we'll bring in an analyst for you to also help us understand the consequences of this order now that Zuma may be a member of Parliament. What's likely to be the impact of his presence in the National Assembly? What will his face on the ballot mean for the MK party? And then later, we'll speak to Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi about the new visa regulations that he announced earlier today. These regulations will make it easier for people to come and work in South Africa. But there are those who are concerned about their implementation. Does government have the necessary resources and the leadership required for effective implementation of these regulations? Now, Stephen Friedman is a political analyst who's going to be facing the nation with us tonight, together with the Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi. Welcome to Face the Nation. Now, this order from the Electoral Court today is quite significant for a number of reasons. We don't know the court's reasons for its decisions yet. The court did indicate that the full judgment will be sent later. But what we know now is that the decision by the IEC to bar Jacob Zuma from the MK party's parliamentary list is dismissed after an objection to his candidacy by a citizen. That has now been dismissed. That clears the way for Jacob Zuma to appear on the MK ballot and head to Parliament should the party manage to get some seats in the National Assembly. Now, given the momentum of the MK party, the momentum that this party has shown this far, the estimation is that they will get a seat or two in Parliament or more. So this then paves the way for a second coming, if you will, of the former President Jacob Zuma to one of the arms of the state, which is Parliament. The question now is, what will be the impact of Zuma's presence in Parliament to our body of politics if he ends up going there? He is a man that has previously indicated that he is too frail to even go to court. In fact, his initial release was based on ill health, right? Resulting in him being granted medical parole. But the former president says he's ready to return, even as president. He said he has unfinished business. This is what he said.
Mawuya ke kunomfana wasenkandla akayiqedanga lethu what 210 akayiqedanga angeni mina kuleso sibalo ngoba ngiyiqedanga uma nje bangathi abantu mfana phuthuma akekho uzomvimba kanti phela sebayakhohlwa ukuthi angiqedanga ngakhishwa ngingakaqedi usenento ofana ngoyiqedela lapha.
So he says he's got unfinished business. So how impactful is he likely to be as an MP for the MK party? So beyond his popularity, beyond his clout, his influence, what difference is having Jacob Zuma in Parliament going to make? It's going to upset the ANC, that's for sure. But would he be satisfied with merely being a backbencher? Is that the kind of sacrifice he's willing to make for this new party, to be an ordinary member of Parliament after having served as president? Or will he consider it to see if he can make another attempt at the presidency? Can he even become president after serving 2 terms, given the constitutional limitations? His argument is that he didn't even finish those terms, the second term that is, so maybe the courts need to clarify that too. They have to tell us what constitutes a finished term of office. Now, having said that, We are headed to elections. Anything is possible. Alliances may be formed. Alliances may be explored. What happens if the ANC falls below 50%? That they need about 2 or 4%, and the MK can deliver that? And what if the MK can deliver that with a condition that Jacob Zuma becomes president? Now that's going to be a conundrum. What if the EFF talks to the MK and other smaller parties and they form a strong united front to unseat the ANC? I mean, it's unlikely given the projected numbers, and even the multi-party charter's numbers are not numbering now. But then again, anything is possible. But here's my take. I think this order is significant for the MK party because, again, it places the party in the public narrative. That helps in propping up its popularity, which may or may not be translated to votes, but still good for the party. But also, given how popular Jacob Zuma was or is in KwaZulu-Natal and even in some of the rural areas outside of KwaZulu-Natal, when voters see him on the ballot, will that not have an impact on the electoral outcome of the MK party? I think it will, in some way. He still garners a lot of popularity, even within the ANC still, in some sanctions of the ANC. Secondly, I think this is significant because it sets a precedent for our electoral system on what's allowed and what is not allowed. I mean, the crux of this case by Jacob Zuma's legal team was that Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution doesn't apply to him. What does that Section 47 say? It bars individuals sentenced to prison for longer than 12 months without the option of a fine from becoming MPs. But that Section 47 has been interpreted differently. Here's how Zuma's lawyer, Advocate Dalimpofu, interprets it.
Can it be said that the drafters of the Constitution, when they use the word conviction here in Section 47, envisaged a normal conviction which has gone through the ranks of the Criminal Procedure Act, Section 35 of the Constitution, where the person has enjoyed their rights? In interpreting, remember we use purposive interpretation. The purpose of including that particular part by the drafters of the Constitution, was it directed at conviction as we all know it, or some conviction that has never happened in the history of mankind, where the person has not had their Section 35 rights by the mouth of the Constitutional Court, by the way?
So they say the remission that President Cyril Ramaphosa granted Jacob Zuma cancelled that sentence. That's basically their argument. It didn't forgive it because it wasn't a pardon. So because of the remission, the sentence was reduced from 15 months to 3 months. Advocate Mpofu also argued that the IEC doesn't have the right to implement Section 47 of the Constitution and decide who can or who can't be an MP. But the IEC, through Advocate Tembeka Ngukai Tobi, argued the effect of the remission of sentence does not change the fact that the court imposed a 15-month sentence. So the decision by the president to grant Jacob Zuma remission shouldn't even matter. Here's him making that argument earlier.
What the constitutional drafters are trying to tell us is that serious law breakers should not be lawmakers. That's the purpose behind Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution.
So what they are saying is, even though he served 3 months because of remission, his sentence was still beyond the minimum of 12 months. So we'll be hearing how the court interprets this Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution when they deliver their full judgment, and whether it believes the IEC overreached here and made a decision that should be made by Parliament on who can or can be an MP, or whether it has the authority to implement this section of the Constitution. The irony, right? The irony of all of this is that the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of the same party which wanted the MK party to be deregistered, gave Jacob Zuma remission, which has now cleared the way for Jacob Zuma to go back to Parliament and possibly attempt being president again. I'm sure he didn't think this is what the remission would actually mean. What do you think of this order of the Electoral Court? Are you excited about Jacob Zuma being back on the list, on top of that list? What do you think the impact will be for the MK at the polls, but also post the elections with the president as the face of the campaign, the president at the top of that list, and with the former president likely to go to parliament as a deployee of the MK party? I've given you my views. What are yours? Please send us a WhatsApp voice note right now on 078 459 1897. That's 078 459 1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you're sending us the voice note from. And please try keep the voice notes at 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. After the break, we're going to bring in Stephen Friedman to help us understand today's developments. And then later on, the Home Affairs Minister, Aaron Motsoaledi. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. Former President Jacob Zuma has won his appeal against the Electoral Commission's decision to disqualify his candidature in the 2024 polls. In an order that was issued earlier today, the Electoral Court set aside the IEC's decision to uphold an objection against Zuma's candidature. The Umkhonto We Sizwe political party headed to the Electoral Court on Monday and argued that the Constitutional Court, which bars one from being a member of the National Assembly if they are convicted of an offence and sentenced to more than 12 months imprisonment without an option of a fine, did not apply to the former President Jacob Zuma. It further argued that Zuma was not convicted of an offence and that the IEC failed to take the remission of his 15-month sentence into account. We were meant to speak to the IEC this evening. They had confirmed to come and chat to us on Face the Nation, but as we started the show, they indicated that they are still consulting with their lawyers and will be making a comment at a later stage. So we've got Stephen Friedman, who is going to help us understand the implications of this order. Thank you so much for making time for us, Prof. I really appreciate it. Let me just get first your reaction to this order that was issued by the Electoral Court today.
Well, thanks, Clement. Look, I'm not a lawyer, Clement, but all I will say is that I think that most adult, rational South Africans will come to a different conclusion to the court because we haven't seen the court's reasons yet. The fact of the matter was that Mr. Zuma was sentenced by the Constitutional Court, the highest court in this land, to a 15-month term. And if the reasons are that his sentence was then commuted by the president, then you are saying that the president is above the Constitutional Court and the president is above the Constitution. And that can't be a comfortable ruling for people who believe in constitutional democracy. The net result of this all is that a former president who entirely off his own bat refused to give evidence to a commission, refused to appear before the court, defied the Constitutional Court, has in effect got away with it. He served a very short prison sentence. He's back in public life. So we're really sending, the Electoral Court is sending a message to South Africa to say that if you are a former president, you can defy the Constitutional Court and the Electoral Court will come to your aid.
Well, the problem here, I suppose, Prof, is that he was given remission by President Cyril Ramaphosa. If that wasn't the case, then there wouldn't have been an argument that his lawyers make that, in fact, that 15 months was then reduced to 3 months. So it was the remission that the president gave that somehow changed the game, no?
Well, it didn't change the game, Clement, because we're a constitutional democracy. The president is a politician. The Constitution is superior to presidents and politicians. And if you're saying that the president's remission changed the situation, then you're saying that the president has more power than the Constitution. And I should imagine that the vast majority of South Africans would be very uncomfortable with the idea that any president has more power than the Constitution. And that we haven't seen the ruling yet, but I mean, if those are the grounds, that's the message the court is sending. That a decision by the president is more important than a decision of the Constitutional Court. That's not how we've been governed for the last 30 years.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the argument the IEC has been making, in that forget what the president or the executive through the president has done in granting this remission. The reality here is the Constitutional Court made a ruling and they sentenced him to 15 months in prison. Whether or not he ended up serving those or whether there was an intervention by the executive, that's a completely separate process. But as you say, Prof, we don't have the reasons from the electoral court yet. The sooner we get those reasons, the better, so we understand what led them to making this order that dismisses the decision that the IEC has taken. I want you to help us understand what follows now. So if the president, the former president Jacob Zuma, ends up going to Parliament, does he serve just as a mere backbencher because the Constitution doesn't necessarily allow, in my understanding, for someone to serve more than 2 terms? His argument is that, well, I didn't even finish that second term. What would this mean if he goes to Parliament? Does he become just an ordinary backbencher?
Yes, he does become an ordinary backbencher, and I don't think it's realistic to expect anything else. I mean, there's all sorts of fevered speculation about what might happen. The fact of the matter is that he's going to be representing a party which is not going to be in the majority and very highly unlikely to be in government. And therefore, if he wishes to serve in Parliament, he will serve in Parliament like any other MP. I think it's very important to stress that the fact that he is a former president in this case should be irrelevant. We're a constitutional democracy. He's subject and should be subject to the same laws as the rest of us. And those laws would dictate that he would sit in Parliament as a backbencher MP. I really don't think that it's terribly likely that he and his party are going to be in a position to choose seats in government.
Mm-hmm. What credibility do you think, I mean, the impact do you think this will have on the credibility of the IEC? This is an independent electoral body. At first, someone within the IEC leaked the parliamentary list for the ANC. There were questions about what impact that's going to have on this body that's supposed to be independent. And now you've got this judgment that effectively says the decision that you've taken was wrong. What impact do you see on the commission?
I think more reasonable people will actually not judge the commission harshly. They're far more likely to judge the electoral court harshly. The IEC in this instance did what any adult, rational South African in their situation would have done. When they looked at the Constitution, they interpreted the Constitution accurately to say that this person is not eligible to stand. And I think it's very disturbing, when we start casting aspersions at the IEC. We've had 30 years of constitutional democracy in this country. One of the reasons we've had 30 years of constitutional democracy is that we've had an independent electoral commission, which really has been an independent electoral commission, and which, in my view, is still an independent electoral commission. And I think now to start undermining the institutions of constitutional democracy in order to score cheap political points is, I think, it's very dangerous because it's actually undermining the future of our democracy. I think the IEC, whatever the electoral court rule, the IEC took a perfectly rational decision on the basis of the facts before them, and I think they should be applauded for that. And I think that it will be a very dangerous day for democracy in South Africa if we start pointing fingers at the IEC for doing its job.
Is it wrong, though, Prof, to point fingers at the IEC? I mean, I understand what you say about their track record over the last 30 years having administered elections, but that doesn't mean they're beyond reproach. If they are very much capable of getting things wrong, we have to point fingers at them. That's part of the benefit of this constitutional democracy.
No, they're not above reproach, Clement, but the point is that we have a constitutional democracy, and when they make mistakes, those mistakes will be corrected by the constitutional democracy and its mechanisms. You mentioned this example of the person leaking information which they should not have leaked. The IEC acted against that. The person has been dismissed, and there may well be other action taken. And that's how constitutional democracy works. Constitutional democracy doesn't stop people making mistakes. Yeah. Constitutional democracy means that you have a means of correcting it when people make mistakes. And the reason I have confidence in the IEC is because when they make mistakes, it can be corrected. We had a situation a few years ago when an entire election in Tlokwe in the Northwest Province was rerun because mistakes had been made and people voted who shouldn't have been voted. But that's how you judge it. Are the mistakes corrected? And the mistakes are corrected. And I think that we should defend this institution because we need it to remain a democracy.
Absolutely. Help us understand what today's development means for the MK party. The fact that Jacob Zuma is going to be on the ballot, he is one of the most recognizable people in the country. We know that from even the ANC's own research, it shows how previously he's been quite popular, not just in KwaZulu-Natal, but in also some parts of the rural areas around the country. When people see him on the ballot, I mean, is that likely to go? Because people in the rural areas, in some parts, not all of them, they still feel sympathetic towards him. They still love him as a former statesman. So what impact do you think today's development is going to have on the electoral fortunes of the MK party?
Clement, I think one of the problems with our national debate is that all sorts of claims are made about how the majority of South Africans feel without any evidence. So, this idea that Mr. Zuma is widely popular among rural South Africans, let's look at some hard evidence. Mr. Zuma has twice now campaigned for the ANC when he was an ANC member in his own village of Nkandla. And in both of those occasions, the IFP increased its majority in Nkandla. So in other words, when Jacob Zuma campaigns for the ANC in Nkandla, the IFP benefit. That's sending a clear message. It's quite clear from the by-election results, which the MK party has fought so far, that they have a firm minority of support. In one case, they got 19%. In another case, they got 28%. And that they're probably running third or fourth biggest party in the province at the moment. That's what the by-elections are telling us. And I would much rather be guided by the evidence of how real South Africans casted their ballots than by claims that somebody did a poll somewhere which came out with a particular finding. I'm not convinced at all that Mr. Zuma is a vote winner. And I think, I think the idea that, people who were going to vote a particular way are going to see Mr. Zuma's face on a ballot paper and vote a different way, I think also underestimates the intelligence of voters. We constantly assume that if people live in rural areas, or they live in shack settlements, they live in townships, that they're not as sophisticated as us and they make all sorts of mistakes that we wouldn't make. And it's simply no evidence to support that. People in townships and shack settlements and rural areas are rational adults who make rational decisions, and they will make their decisions on the basis of what they feel is good for them. There is a minority which will support the MK party, but this idea that they're suddenly going to change the minds of all sorts of people in rural areas because Mr. Zuma's face appears on the ballot is certainly not happened when he contested a real election in his hometown.
Do you think the ANC should be concerned after today's order?
Well, the other thing which I think needs to be mentioned, which is interesting, is that if you look at the only hard evidence we have of the support of the MK party is these two by-elections that they fought. And what the by-elections are telling us is that they are taking as many votes off the IFP and the EFF as they are off the ANC. So in other words, the effect of the MK party, according to those by-elections, is to take a degree of support away from these three other parties. And in that sense, the effect on the ANC may be neutral. It may do as badly or as well as it was going to do before the MK party came along. It's very unlikely, if one looks at the local election results and the by-elections that we've had since then, it's very unlikely that the ANC will get anything near a majority in KZN. But that may be for reasons very different to the fact that there's an MK party, because, as I say, the effect on the parties is being spread among them. It's not just the ANC which is losing votes.
Professor Stephen Friedman, thank you so much for making time for us this evening on Face the Nation. That's a research professor at the University of Johannesburg. Do you agree with what Professor Stephen Friedman had to say? Do you see an impact at all as a result of this court order today, the electoral court's order? Do you see an impact on the electoral fortunes and outcomes of the MK party. We've asked you to send us your voice notes on 078 459 1897, or please send us an X at Face the Nation SABC. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Face the Nation. The Home Affairs Minister, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, has announced the introduction of a remote work visa as a new addition to the country's visa regime earlier this afternoon. Now, digital nomads who wish to work while staying in South Africa will soon be able to do so. People employed in other countries but want to work remotely while staying in the country will, however, need to earn at least 1 million rand. To talk more about this, we joined by the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. Minister, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Welcome to Face the Nation. Now, you have now tabled these new immigration laws for South Africa. What do they entail?
Good evening, Clement. Good evening to the listeners and viewers. Clement, why are you upside down on my screen? Is there anything that can be turned around? Both me and you are upside down on my screen.
Well, we are.
Is it the problem on my side?
I think let's not worry about now. The tech team is telling me that we are fine on television, so we can continue being upside down, but we are okay on TV.
Okay, thank you very much. What was the question again?
So I'm asking about this new visa regulations and the amendments. Just help us understand what they entail.
Well, you may remember that this stemmed from the State of the Nation address in 2022 by the President about making changes in our visa regime so as to encourage tourism, investment, build business, get skilled people into the country so that the economy can grow. In that regard, he chose the former Director General of the Department of Home Affairs, Mr. Mavuso Msimang, to review the visas. He did so, and he gave a report. And the report had recommendations in two forms. The first recommendation were process recommendation. That means what processes need to be changed in Home Affairs in order for there to be the improvements the President is looking for. Mm-hmm. The second is policy recommendations. In other words, what are the new policies that needs to be introduced in order to do what the President is achieving? So there were 4. That means 4 process recommendations and 4 policy recommendations. There are those which are new, like the remote working visa. But the remote working visa, because it's not in the Act, you can't just change it via regulations. We are going to have to do something about the Act. So what I was explaining today is how the remote working visa is envisaged to come and work once all the legalities have been dealt with. I don't know whether you want me to explain exactly what it is, the remote working visa.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it is not in the original Immigration Act, so you can't just change it by regulation, but it is definitely in the recommendations. What it means is you have an individual who's working, for instance, in a country like America. It may be America, it might be UK, it might be China, who can do work for that particular company without staying in that particular country. So most of them will like to come to a country like South Africa, where their dollar is stretched much more. For instance, if a person is earning $1 million in the US, coming to South Africa, that $1 million is multiplied manifold. And so he's staying here, accommodation is cheaper in terms of dollars, the food is cheaper, can employ more people, etc., etc. But while he's working for an American company, and we don't want anybody, we want specifically people whose minimum salary is one equivalent of 1 million rand. And then for 6 months, they don't have to pay tax in South Africa. That's what will bring them here. But if they want to stay for more than 6 months, then the tax burden kicks in. They will have to pay tax. Now, that's a very good recommendation, but because it is not yet in the Immigration Act, we need to find a way how we amend the Act to allow it in. Mm-hmm. You can't simply bring it in through regulations. but it's in the recommendations of the Mavuso report.
Yeah. So there's always been concerns even by business about how extremely difficult it is for business to bring international skills, because that's also a major impediment for foreign investors who commit their funds to the country. How are these new regulations going to make it easier for business to bring in those skills here? And maybe help us understand how these changes are affecting even what used to be the requirements for critical skills.
The critical skills, let me start there because it's easier. The critical skills, Clement, first of all, I need to define it because people really confuse the critical skill with maybe an important skill. A critical skill is a skill that is needed by the South African economy. But we found that people who possess that skill are very few in the country, such that we are forced to cross the borders of the country to look for such people. That is the first thing. But for that to happen, the Minister of Home Affairs need to gazette the list of such critical skills. But because Home Affairs doesn't have the skill nor the capacity nor the knowledge of what are the most important skills in the labor market, we asked the Department of Basic Education to do this for us. They usually hire the Human Science Research Council, which will work with other entities like the labor market surveys, etc., and then put up the list. We send this list to NETLEC. As you know, NETLEC consists of the state, the labor, meaning the trade unions, society, and government, where they look into it. Once they approve it, it comes to Home Affairs. We then gazette it. Now, if you have got a profession that is on that gazette, it means you are on the critical skills list. What is left is for a company in South Africa to offer you a job. Once you give us the letter of appointment and we look at your certificate and your profession is on the gazetted list, then you get the critical skills list. People confuse it with general work visa. They don't work the same. You get the critical skills list immediately. Now, what we have done, we have introduced a new concept called trusted employer scheme, whereby the employer who wants to bring you into South Africa is the one who must run locally and all over the government, the globe, all over the world, looking for the documents that are needed. When people apply for some of these visas, Clement, they need documents, some of whom you might have to go to other countries to get them. Others, you get them locally, and it takes time for Home Affairs to collect them. So we said, employer, go and collect them on your own. So the speed with which you want to bring this person here depends on your efficiency of collecting all those documents. Once you collect them, we want, be it a confirmation of qualifications or years of experience or bank statements, whatever it is, collect them, bring them to us. We will believe you. That's why we say you are a trusted employer. But we believe you on the proviso that if we do a random check next time in your company, we must not find any mistake whatsoever. We must not find you having misrepresented yourself, because you will immediately lose that trusted employer scheme, so that you are no longer in control of the speed with which you bring people to come and work for your company.
How long has it taken, Minister? Maybe let me ask it this way. Why has it taken so long to deal with the cumbersome visa system? Because the president didn't just talk about it at this State of the Nation address. This has always been something he commits to ensuring that the Department of Home Affairs addresses, hence even the appointment of Mr. Msimang to try and assist with expediting the process. Why has it taken so long for these new regulations to be gazetted?
Well, first of all, Mr. Msimang was chosen so that it's a systemic review, rather than just changing what was there in the laws already, or trying to make it faster or more efficient. This was a complete overhaul, in other words, by Mr. Mavuso Msimang. But then, as I've said, Clement, it is not just a wish. You don't just press a button, it's a wish. Some of these things have to go through processes. I told you, there are policy recommendations. We have got to go in and look at the new policies. Others are process recommendations where you have got to go in and look at processes. So some of them need change, as I said, of regulations, which is a process in government, which the minister cannot just wake up and say, I'm now changing this regulation. There are processes that needs to be followed, and that's what has been happening.
What about foreign nationals who come to work in South Africa? When it talks to critical skills, what's allowed and what's not allowed? And is that contained in the new regulations you've announced today, or is that based on the law that's always been existing, but clearly there have been some issues with implementation?
No, what has changed, Clement, about critical skills? I've already told you that once the critical skill list is drawn up and the Minister of Home Affairs gazettes it, once you get a letter of appointment by a company in South Africa and your profession, the certificate you give to us appears on that gazetted critical skills list, then we give you a critical skills visa. The problem with it, Clement, is that it was updated every 4 years. So that if a new critical skills come into being, it must wait for 4 years. So what we have changed after the Mavuso recommendations is that we now gazette a critical skills as needed. That's why last year we gazetted more, I think twice or thrice already. So we no longer have to wait for 4 years. Once a particular company, employer or individual show us about the need for a particular skill to be made critical, and we investigate and found that is true, then we gazette, we don't have to wait for 4 years. That is the change that has been made in the critical skills list. The other skills which are not on the critical skills list, they fall under the general work visa. In the past, Clement, to do general work in South Africa, you had to go to the Department of Labor, convince the department, or your prospective employer actually must convince the department that they've looked all over South Africa. They can't find any citizen or any permanent resident of South Africa who can perform that work. Then they are forced to cross the borders and go to another nation. Now you can see what type of work needed to be done. Now, in the proposal, which you are amending, fortunately, we can even do it, this one in the form of regulations. We are coming with a new system called point system. In other words, we give you certain points based on certain criteria. Those scoring those points have not yet been gazetted, so people don't know about it yet. But we look at those criteria and we give you points. Once you score a particular at a particular level, particular score, then you come into South Africa. You no longer have got the tedious of going to the Department of Labor, trying to convince them that everything was done to look for a South African. A South African cannot be found. It was very difficult to implement that law. In fact, I must confess to you that there are many people who are doing general work who did not even obtain that certificate from the Department of Labor because it's tedious. So we are saying, why do we keep it in the statute when we know very well that's not working? That's why we have we are going to have to gazette a new regulation whereby you are saying you can only come through a point system. You no longer need that certificate from the Department of Labor.
Okay. So what's going to be the role of, because implementation is going to be important. And I saw that business, as much as they are welcoming this new visa regulations, their concerns are whether or not there's capacity within the state for implementation, and you can respond to that. But what's going to be the role of inspectors? Are you saying with these new regulations, we're not going to see industries that are overcrowded with people who are foreign nationals who have been employed even when the employers have not done enough to find the skills within South Africa? Those are not scarce skills.
Well, as I'm saying, the once these are gazetted, it means it's regulations, the law. Any employer who breaches that law will need to be punished. Obviously, inspectors will have to be needed. But before employers are punished, we need to set out regulations for them and say, you can't bring so and so into the Republic, or you can bring so and so. So first of all, the employers might argue that, well, I thought I needed this person. I thought I needed to bring them in. Just to give you an example, in 2019, when the truck drivers' problem started around eThekwini, we met some of the truck companies, the owners, and we asked them, is it true when the truck drivers are saying foreign nationals are preferred against them? They are preferred, they are the ones who are hired. Companies prefer them. We asked the companies. Some of them claim that no, some of their trucks are a critical skill. And I said, this is how a critical skills works. So did you apply for a critical skills list? And we found that they didn't, in which case, and it means they've broken the law, they must be punished. So even with general work visa, we want to set it up in law so that when we tell the companies who you can bring into South Africa and who cannot, it becomes very clear and in black and white, and there's no more excuse. But of course, if some companies are not reliable, are not trustworthy, they are still going to need inspectors. But that work of having to go to the Department of Labor and obtain a certificate, and Clement, how do you prove that I've looked for a South African? It means putting an advert and having people apply, shortlisting them and interviewing them and searching their SAQA qualifications. It was quite tedious. So we are saying we are making it very simple. Mr. Employer, this person won so many points, he can come in. That one did not win enough points in terms of the point system, and then he cannot come in. If an employer brings them in, then it means that employer is willfully breaking the law, even after we have made things simple for him.
Yeah, and I suppose the question to that, Minister, is what happens to those employers, and how confident should South Africans be in that as government you are going to implement those regulations and you're going to hold those employers accountable? Because you are aware of how many employers out there have not even done the bare minimum when it comes to checking for other South Africans before they can hire foreign nationals that are not even bringing critical skills. You know about the hospitality industry, the trucking company industries. So South Africans who look at you and say, but there's been a failure on the part of government to implement the regulations that already exist. What gives them confidence this time around that with these regulations, you will implement them and hold employers accountable?
Well, Clement, they were being implemented. They were actually implemented, some of them, but as you say, it depends on labor inspectors. Some employers have already been arrested for employing people who are not a critical skill, who have not even followed the rules of general work visa, even employing illegal people for that matter, because it's a criminal offense. They are taken to court, the court just charged them 3,000 rand and released them. And they found it convenient to pay the 3,000 rand and go on doing what they've been doing. So some of the things changes we are going to do are in the white paper. You know that we are doing the white paper in which we are saying we are overhauling the whole migration system of the country. So some of the proposals we are going to make, once the white paper, fortunately, is appearing in cabinet for the last time, once the cabinet accepts it, then it becomes a policy of the country. Then we are studying to develop the bills on citizenship, immigration, and refugee protection. Some of those things we are going to change in there and say you no longer need to be fined 3,000 rand, but you need to be arrested. And employers are taking advantage because some of those things are not happening. Now, those which you can change in the regulations now, we are actually changing them. So it's not necessarily true that we are not implementing. And it's unfair for employers to say, well, this is good, but we doubt if it will ever be implemented. By the way, we have already implemented from the 1st of March, the Trusted Employer Scheme. And I don't know whether you want to know exactly how it works because it's very interesting. We have already implemented it and companies are happy with it. Maybe if you agree, I'll explain to you how the Trusted Employer Scheme works. In other words, how does the company win to be a trusted employer? Can I go on?
Yes, I would like to go on, Minister, but before you do, I'd like to push back a little bit there and say, I don't agree with you, with all due respect, that there has been a thorough implementation. I think that's why we have a hospitality industry that is it's full of people that are being employed, and some, or even some of the members of parliament who have often gone and done visits to those restaurants, or they talk to the trucking company employees, they realize that the employers themselves are not doing the work. So the point I'm making is there's been a failure in the past by government, because even the Labour Department says, well, we don't have enough inspectors. So as a result, you've allowed employers to continue employing people without doing the necessary work to consider South Africans first.
Well, Clement, the word thorough was introduced by you, not me. You used the word thoroughly implement. I never used the word thorough. I said we've implemented, but it's not enough. Because for implementation, you need enough labor inspectors from the Department of Labor. Yes, we concede that we don't have enough. You need immigration officers to enforce law from Department of Health. Yes. From Department of Home Affairs. Yes, I concede that we do not have enough. We even went to Parliament to show them how many roadblocks or how many raids we have done. I can give them to you. I can show you that in so many roadblocks, in so many visits. For instance, we went to Parliament and say we are going to visit, to make 500 visits to companies. That means agriculture, hospitality, trucking companies, hotels. But you can imagine 500 is a very small number per annum. And we have got a list of employers who, out of those visits, they were arrested and sent to court, and I said they were charged 3,000 rand. So I never claimed that we have done it thorough. If we have done it thorough, then there won't be any need for changes. So It was not thorough. It was with the capacity that we have.
Okay. Minister, I just want to ask, there's a listener who sent us a tweet who'd like to get an update about the processing of ZEP holders. Patrick on Twitter says, please can you ask the Minister of Home Affairs to explain the backlog in the processing of ZEP holders' applications migrating to mainstream visas. I submitted my application on the 25th of August 2022. Do you have an update for us?
I don't really have the numbers here with me, but I know that there is progress. Remember, we said quite a number of them were not applying because they were believing these things will be thrown out in court. So he might be correct. I'm sitting here with lots and lots of letters which I need to sign in the thousands, which we still need to sign and give them exemptions. Remember, we said when people need to apply for ZEPs, one favor we'll do to them is to exempt them from going to the Department of Home Affairs, Department of Employment and Labor, to look for this certificate which I've just spoken about, which I said in the new regulations we are changing it to the point system. But now in their case, because the point system cannot apply retrospectively, they are still required to go to the Department of Labor if they want to apply for general work. But we are sort of allowing them in the letters that are after application, in the letters that I'm going to sign, that you don't have to go to the Department of Labor.
Okay. Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi, thank you so much for making time for us. Truly appreciated on Face the Nation this afternoon. Now, we've asked you to send us your tweets on @FaceTheNation, SABC. There are some tweets that have come through. In the interest of time, we'll just go through a few of them that have come through. We've asked you what you make of the order by the Electoral Court that effectively goes against the decision by the IEC to bar the former President Jacob Zuma from standing as a candidate on the list by the MK party. Patrick says the MK are going to use the court order to their advantage in the election run-up, and no one can blame them. And how many votes extra they get, we will never know, as there is no history. That's a message there from Patrick. Mirwa says, good evening, Clement. Jacob Zuma beat the ANC again at the Electoral Court. Hate or love Jacob Zuma at your own peril. The man is very smart and he is a chess player. And that's how we wrap the Tuesday edition of Face the Nation. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back on Thursday at 8 p.m. Have a good evening. Cheers.